All right. Thank you, Joe. So with that, I will begin the recording. So once again, welcome everyone. And I briefly wish to introduce our speaker today, Deniz Bashar. So Deniz is a planner, theater researcher, poet, puppet maker, and two-time national award-winning playwright from Turkey. In 2021, she did her PhD in the Humanities Department at Concordia University with a dissertation on contemporary Turkish theater entitled A Dismissed Heritage, Contemporary Performance in Turkey Defined Through Karagöz, with reference to the Ottoman shadow puppetry tradition. Supported by an FRQSC fellowship, she conducted further research in her fields of study through her postdoctoral work. Her play, Wine and Halva, was professionally staged in May 2024 in English and received with critical acclaim in Montreal, and will be remounted in May 2026 by the original team in Testri Dunia Teatr, also based in Montreal. Her collaboratively written play, Autumn in New Stockholm, will be staged in French in Montreal in the March 2026 theater during the March 2026 theater season. She is currently working at Sabancı University in Istanbul as a professional assistant for the contemporary Turkish history courses. Just a brief note here. Deniz is co-researcher on the project that we will be hearing about today, Professor İnci Olgun from Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University. We were hoping that İnci Hoca would be able to join us during the Q&A especially, and we're not sure because of a last-minute emergency whether this will be possible or not, but I would nonetheless like to introduce her as well. Following her undergraduate education in architecture, İnci Olgun worked on various fields of spatial research and projects under the Urban Design Graduate Program of Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University in Istanbul. Professor Olgun completed her doctoral thesis on urban memory and spatial reading. She has carried out research projects, e-publications, workshops, exhibitions, and book publications on both natural and artificial systems supporting the built environment and urban design strategies. Throughout her career, Professor Olgun has won many awards from national and international competitions in architectural and urban design. Since 2001, she has been a project group manager in planning and urban design studios as an instructor in the Department of City and Regional Planning of Mimar Sinan Fine Arts University. As a member of the Design Guidelines team, which is a multidisciplinary platform, Professor Olgun continues to work intensively on sustainability, ecological planning, and design at urban and rural scales. Thank you, everyone, once again for joining us. And I now leave the floor to my colleague, Deniz Bashar.
Thank you so much for giving me the opportunity. Let me share my presentation with you. Okay, you can see it, right? Okay, so I'm very happy to do this presentation because this was something I actually wanted to work on for a very long time, and I made the first proposal to in Georgia back in 2017, and then we could only start in around 2021 when I returned to Istanbul. So why is this such an interesting case study is my question. And the people that you see here are members of the Çıplak Ayaklar Kumpanyası, CHAK in short. The translation is the Bare Feet Troupe. So, wait. So, what interests us as an urban planner and a performance scholar in this dynamic is to archive and analyze the dialectics of the bodily movement and placemaking within the urban context through influences, echoes, subconscious continuities that bleeds into the dance practice itself, which then adapts the city to include more diversity of experiences. This is the topic sentence of our long-term research. Why I thought this was a very interesting thing to study had a couple of reasons. The first reason is that I did a lot of research on the dynamic between urban space and especially urban resistance movements and cultural policies and independent theaters. And Çıplak Ayaklar Kumpanyası experienced every dynamic multiplied by 2 or 3 because of 2 reasons. The first reason is dance is a more stigmatized and marginal medium of stage arts compared to theater for conservative groups in Turkey. And the second reason is that Tophane is a very special little patch of Beyoğlu. And for the ones who don't know, Beyoğlu is one of the most important historical districts of Istanbul, and it's known as where the Europeanization started. It has always been a bohemian place. It has always been the center of arts for the larger region. And it has also always been cosmopolitan. So this is a region in Istanbul that is problematic for the conservative imagination. Then there's Tophane within Beyoğlu, which is a smaller patch of this larger district, which is very conservative. And by conservative, I mean prone to violence at certain tension moments, which is different than just being conservative. And I also have these quotations, so I want to read them, and I want to put dance in relation to being and living in this section of the city as dancers. Dance moves into a space, but also makes room out of what it inhabits, invites gathering of publics, and enhances their capacities to pay attention, give audition, contact, kinesthetic effects, and affects elsewhere. So Çıplak Ayaklar Kumpanyası is also very special because it has been around for a while and it created a repertoire of hope. So there are so many things about Chuck that I cannot cover today. For example, it gave rise to 2 really important indie bands of Istanbul, and they're well received and well listened, Gevende and Büyük Ev Ablukada. These are both really important indie music groups, especially like Büyük Ev Ablukada is making these very big and very performative concerts right now. They started as people who were playing at Çak. And then they kind of overflew from this small place. Another important thing is that the little banner that you see, and Mihran Tomasyan is holding it in this picture, under this little logo of Çıplak Ayaklar, umutsuzluğa alışma, which means do not get used to hopelessness. So this was a banner that Chuck Ensemble created. And it's still in their studio, and they still take this banner to every protest that they go. And Büyük Ev Ablukada, the group also took this slogan, and they're using it in their concerts. So it created this slogan almost that became anonymous. And this is a picture I took last year after the infamous 19th of March 2025, when the protests in Sabancı University were continuing, and BA students had the same banner, do not get used to hopelessness. And my assumption is that they don't know the work of Chuck. So we're also talking about a repertoire of hope. And this is a company that established itself as a small independent ensemble in 2003, and they rented their current studio space in 2007. And we particularly did an in-depth interview with one of the co-founders of Chuck, Mihran Tomasyan, who's a figure that most of us know. And I just want to contextualize who he is in dance. So Thomasyan sees himself as the third generation of modern dance in Turkey, following the second generation, which he defines as Aydın Teker, Geyvan Macmillan, Kaya İlhan, Beyhan Murphy, and Şebnem Aslan. After the establishment of the studio in 2007, due to its flexible use, Thomasyan defines the space as being multifunctional and living 24/7 and moving constantly in relation to the Tophane neighborhood. This is also how the bands were created too, because they were occupying the space at night. So our methodology, like how did we do this research? On January 2022, we went with İnce Olgun to conduct an in-depth interview with Mihran Thomasyan. This was like a semi-structured interview. We had a set of questions, and then he gave us information about things that we never imagined. And we asked more questions. And after that, as you can see, there's a long gap since we meet again for the research purposes, because in that time we mapped the interview. And by mapping, I mean locating every place that Thomasyan mentioned in his interview. The initial findings were presented for the book project that I'm working on with other co-editors. Me and İnce Olgun, with this research, we have a chapter. So the initial findings were presented, and we received some feedback. And then December 2022, there's a second visit. We took the map to Mihran Thomasyan to actually understand if we understood the first interview right, because the space is very fluid. As you can see, I'll explain more in the coming slides. Like Istanbul is going through very intense change in the last couple of decades. But also in the second visit, Çetin Argant, Professor Çetin Argant, who's a photography professor, came with us. And he helped us document the studio to understand the infrastructure, the urban infrastructure around Chuck. And then there's a third visit closely after the second one. And this time, Professor Argan took pictures of the studio while it's being used, while there are humans inside it, and they're rehearsing and choreographing things. And then we also, before this visit, we also shared the draft of our article with the Chuck team through Thomasya, and they verbally passed on corrections and facts and corrected the assumptions we made, basically. In December 2024, we put out the first public outlet of our research, and you can access it in Tasarım Rehberleri. The findings are both in Turkish and English, and some of Professor Argan's beautiful pictures are presented there. And then, interestingly, we had a Turkish presentation right before this one, a pop-up presentation. And another Czech co-founder, Maral Ceranoğlu, came for discussion. And she gave us more in-depth information, confirming a lot of the things that Mihran Thomasyan told, but also opening up details, especially in a gendered aspect. And this is the website that I mentioned you, Tasarım Rehberleri. Do not get used to hopelessness. So what is so weird about Chuck and Tophane? Chuck's studio performance space is located in Beyoğlu district's Tophane quarter, within the particular neighborhood of Firuza. The studio is not mentioned even in the latest data collections of Istanbul municipality as an arts and culture space, which locates the troupe in a precarious set of relationships in relation to local authorities. This precarity is established due to both the ambiguous status of the studio space in relation to the city development plans, and also because of the masculinist conservative tensions within the neighborhood. This dynamic keeps the troupe as an underground art creation center despite its committed community of followers for almost 2 decades. So here I can open what I mean by masculinist conservative tensions. So between 2006 and around 2012, I'd say, there are very famous gallery attacks in Tophane. So as part of the gentrification in Tophane, there were these pop-up gallery spaces, and they're still there. And unknown people, still undocumented and unknown to this day, like broke into these places and vandalized these places, and this created a lot of panic about this neighborhood. And also in 2013, during Gezi Park resistance, the groups of people who probably committed the same crimes against the galleries, they were actively mobilized to lynch the Gezi protesters. And this was a known information that was floating at the time. You know, if you're running from the police from Taksim Square down to Karaköy, never use Boğaz Kesen slope, which would take you through the middle of Tophane. Which also Mihran Tomasyan told like very particular stories about the Gezi movement in Tophane, because they themselves, like dancers, are read as Gezici, which is a very particular term that means, you know, you're a Gezi Park protester. So these are like very famous historical plans of Istanbul. Jack Pervetić is a bit of a legend in urban planning in Istanbul. So he, of course, mapped this part of the city. And this little like square at the side that zooms in on where the current day Çak is. Today, the parcel contains many small studio spaces which came after Çak, and the historical Firuza Hamam. So the courtyard that you see in the previous picture is surrounded by Firuza Hamam and other little studio spaces. And only after Çak, other artists came gradually whenever a studio was left by another form of work. The fact that the landowner lives abroad and the parcel, due to the registered historical quality of the hammam, cannot be divided or easily sold, keeps rents relatively low for Çak. So there's a very particular urban and economic relationship that actually keeps the continuity of the place, yet it is again very precarious. Continuing from here. So, and then there's the Galata Port and Beyoğlu Culture Route project. As you can see, like this is the map of Galata, and these are the landmarks of the Beyoğlu Culture Route. And right in the middle, like close to, like slightly under Galata Kulesi and Galata Port destinations, basically, there's the Çak Studio. So this is a location that's also under the pressures of very, very heavy state-made gentrification. I'm going to read two little quotes from Asu Aksoy and Kevin Robbins' research. In July 2020, the Turkish Ministry of Culture and Tourism declared its ambition to invest in a major new cultural project centered on Istanbul's Beyoğlu's historic district. Significantly, this involved large-scale investments and developments along the famed İstiklal Caddesi and around Taksim Square, with a wider ambit, however, encompassing adjacent districts, notably Karaköy, Kabataş, and Gümüşsuyu. The project has been dubbed the Beyoğlu Culture Route. In what is undoubtedly its most consequential aspect, the Beyoğlu Cultural Route is essentially a project of erasure. of all kinds of memories. Its intent is to neutralize the historical legacy of the district, both the complex possibilities inherent in cultural diversity and harrowing memories arising out of wanton destruction of all possibilities inherent in complexity. What the Ministry of Culture now proposes is the inauguration of a new cultural site designed to showcase the capacities of neoconservative, neoliberal, and Islamist economics and politics. The minister can no longer envisage a meaningful place in the city for the old Beyoğlu with its unorthodox way of seeing and telling. What is being devised, then, is a statist arrogation of the distinctive local cultural space of Beyoğlu. I agree. That's why I use this quotation. And these are pictures of Çetin Ergan from the past decade, more so from the last couple of years, but spanning a little behind that too. And this is the time and the continuing time of the building of Beyoğlu Culture Route. So as you can see, there are these very sleek architectural spaces, and then there's the historical bits of the city that are segregated, and then there are these gaps, and there are these people who don't seem like they're fitting in, yet they are Istanbulers. And like for at least a decade and more than a decade, this location was like this. In a constant construction. The entire Istanbul is under construction, but this particular region was under very heavy construction. And as you can see, the current day Istanbul Modern, or designed by the famous architect Renzo Piano, it's a very different, very sleek, very cool architectural design, and it's very different than the typology of old Beyoğlu. And what this creates, I'll go a bit behind. What this creates is that there's a lot of economic pressure on this rather impoverished small neighborhood that is also conservative and voting for conservative parties. So there's a misdirected anxiety. So there's gentrification by the hand of the conservative state that's endangering a conservative but poor and working class neighborhood. And that anxiety is not directed to the government, but it is rather directed to the people who are now using the space. And more so the people who actually are there, like the Gezici people who have always been in Istanbul. So as you can imagine, it's a day-to-day negotiation since 2007. And there are a lot of anecdotes that Chuck Company can tell. I cannot get into all of them, maybe in the Q&A. I'll read this part. Especially in their first years, Chuck was quite active in human rights protests in Istanbul and did many performances during such protests to show solidarity. Their first turning point was the establishment of their Tophane studio. So between 2003 and 2007, they have this more nomadic phase where they're also floating between all these protests. And then they come to Tophane, which allowed them the time and space to create more refined works that intervene with public debates in less immediate but more artistically refined ways. The relationship between space, urban protests, Tophane Studio, and their later 2017 Iznik residency, which is still continuing, and Chuck's choreographies mirrored each other in many ways. In Tophane, the urban context and the dynamics of the neighborhood shaped the creations of Chuck's choreographies, where dance became the archive of the survival dynamics under the urban precarity of the group in Istanbul and the medium itself in Turkey, because modern dance is not a mainstream medium in Turkey, unlike theater. Urbanity of the habitat, the public sphere itself kept creeping into the studio, encouraging the artists to stay in relation to the momentary shifts in the city. Um, so how did they continue? What is the main point of negotiation? And it's very simple and very smart economy. So the main difference between the gallery and Çak is that the galleries were not part of the economic system of Tophane neighborhood, yet Çak is. They get all of their services from the people in the neighborhood. Uh, and this network of local people were key actors that made sure the safety of the dancers during the gallery attacks and the particularly Gezi Park resistance. And there are cases where uh, pe people of the neighborhood physically intervened with certain attacks. I want to read this quote by Adesola Akinleye. Dance Architecture and Engineering is the name of the book, which was a big inspiration for us during this project. This means by which we notice and language our bodily experience becomes instrumental to the processes we use to understand ourselves, our neighbors, and our environment. The cartography of our understanding of the bodily experience directly maps the grace of ourselves in the city. How urban spaces unwrap themselves in the lives of the individuals who reside in them becomes the dance of the city. So, thresholds. This is actually a definition by İnce Olgun, and this is a definition that's used a lot in urban planning. So, a threshold can be something that bodily blocks you. So, like it might be a road that you cannot pass, or it might be a border. Or it might be very psychological. Like that there's violence after a certain place in the city. That's a psychological threshold. You don't pass through there. So what are the thresholds of this neighborhood? There are many. I want to read this. On the other hand, according to Thomasyan, there are visceral thresholds that divide the neighborhood, where different interest groups can dominate the urban space with their controlling presence. Presence of tension between different income groups and social statuses, along with conservative mobilization, keeps the dancers' bodies constantly aware of their relationality with the urban space and the people they occupy the urban scene with. This is why many productions of Çak actually allude to their own living and working practices within Tophane. Another little quote. Dance is therein a specific physical, sensual way of accessing worlds, and by providing people with the specific form of aesthetic education, they are given the chance to live in a free and equal political community based on self-development. So this is a very idealized version of dance. And I find it interesting that, if we look at this definition of dance, Çak is building a utopia within their studio, yet that utopia has a lot of difficulty surviving even in the courtyard. And there it turns into a heterotopia, and there a lot of negotiations begin. Some of these negotiations succeed eventually, but the resilience is what eventually shapes the space. So this is the courtyard, the very famous courtyard. Which they very slowly made safe for themselves over more than a decade. And this is the map. So these are all of the locations mentioned by Thomasyan. And I grouped them in four. I'm not going to go into specifics, but first, he gave us a history of independent dance of Istanbul since 1990s, like all of the places that they used, where they can do late night rehearsals, where they can take extra lights, whatever. And then there are, of course, landmarks, which define where the space is. And then the last two are very important. He noted the allies and threats. And it's very known, and Gezi especially made it very, very visible. Uh, so there are two particular performances that I'm going to briefly mention. One of them is the reverse ocean. So reverse ocean is important because it was a very, very site-specific performance. It was created for this facade of the studio. The staircase, the umutsuzluğa alışma balcony, the tech room, the little kitchen. So this was this was a project that was very, very site specific in an architectural way. So I'm not going to go into that again because I want to cover a couple more things. So Thomasyan also spoke about the influence of space on their work, and I want to read this quote from him to you. So just one little note, Tophane Studio is since 2007, and then in 2017, a decade later, they collectively purchased this land in Iznik, and they're creating an open air studio and a residency area, which is changing their way of working. Space would change our entire way of producing, I think. Here you always work with a closed door with one window. There you'll be there, sorry. There your view would be different in Iznik. And the dynamics of the way you move your body inside that view would be very different too. Because, for example, in the improvisation works that we do, there are such things like this. You walk in the space, you take in the reflection of something you see into your body. You see this branch and you take its reflection. You would then need to go from this reflection to another reflection. When we are in the studio, we interact with the influences of the cables, fluorescent lights, dance mats, pieces of the wall-to-wall carpet, etc. When you do it in the residency, when we did those 4 days, everything changes. Your scale changes. The codes that you take into your body, the reflections that you take into your body are completely different. It would absolutely change the productions. What I said about different forms of performance, that is a benefit of that. I can try out a format that you cannot do in Istanbul, such as to choreograph a tree, to choreograph a river, to choreograph a slope, to choreograph the distance itself. It allows you to try out things that cannot fit into a black box. I mean, I hope it will. So this is a really interesting performance and really particular for our own research. Hiçbir şey yerinde değil. Nothing is in its place. Chuck's 2017 performance, exactly actually a moment when they're transferring to the Iznik studio. Both studios are still very active, but this is a moment that they can also break free from Tophane. Chuck's 2017 performance, Nothing is in its place, which is still performed, is about loss, forced displacement, and immigration. The main idea of performance is shaped around wooden plugs that separate the dancers, but they move together, sensing each other. Using video mapping on the wooden panels, dancers' own bodies appear fragmented and juxtaposed onto each other, which alludes to the shifting identities and reconstructions of the understanding of one's own body through and after the experience of displacement. One of the main inspirations for the material idea of using panels as the centerpiece of this dramaturgy was the door of the studio itself, which separates the world into an inside and outside, but also constantly keeps them in relation to each other in a way not seeing but sensing each other and moving together. This is an image from the performance. And another quote from Adesola Akinleye. Conversations between dance making and city making practices involve looking at how accounting for the everyday bodily experience of movement of the city speaks to dance and through dance. So this is the end of my presentation. I was a bit excited, so I'm just going to go through if there's something I forgot. Okay, there's one last thing that I want to mention, and then I want to take in questions. So there's also a dark history of Tophane neighborhood. This used to be a district of non-Muslims, entire Beyoğlu, including Tophane, and mostly Greek Orthodox people and Armenian people lived in this neighborhood. And then through waves of different kinds of violence, while Ottoman Empire was falling apart, and after the establishment of Turkish Republic, and especially in 1955 pogroms, this uh, this part of the city become completely isolated because people were forced to leave, forced to exile. And then people, especially from inner Anatolia, came, and they were very poor, and they were also internally displaced for different reasons. And they settled, they occupied these neighborhoods, and they created very enclosed conservative communities, which are also different than a lot of the conservative working class establishments in Istanbul. So and another problem of this district also is, which is different than other conservative and working class parts of Istanbul, is that there's a very significant drug use issue here, which also fuels the violence. A lot of the times, this is not really mentioned, but younger men, there is always younger men from the neighborhood who are part of these violent acts. They are under influence of something which is available in the district. And that is negotiated too by the dancers. And as you can imagine, it's very difficult. Yet there's an insistence to stay, and there's an insistence to work. And the last thing I'll say, why I was so interested in this case study, is that there's this bias in urban planning as a discipline, that arts and artists always come to a neighborhood and they start gentrification, and eventually they damage the neighborhood, the people who live in the neighborhood, because the original group of people who are living in the neighborhood become the people who cannot afford it. So supposedly this was the story in San Francisco and many other cities, in New York. Yet there are a lot of nuances to that story. One of the neighbors of Chuck is the Museum of Innocence by Orhan Pamuk. That's a very different establishment compared to Chuck, and it's not precarious. So why I wanted to work on this by putting together these two disciplines was also to show, there is a lot of resistance, resilience, and precarity involved in art making. And it doesn't go in the ways that the urban planning discipline has a tendency to tell this story. So that's where I stop. Thank you. Do I
Thank you.
stop sharing?
That would be great. So we can maybe see
Okay.
a little more closely.